All right, so the promise revealed, now what? Last week we talked about finding the secret to the promise, and we did a little bit of that, and now we're going to continue to look at the idea of divine guidance and how to know whether it's really divine or not. How do we know that we're actually receiving divine guidance? Last week we said the first and the very first thing that we must do in order to know that we're being divinely guided is to have a willingness to... Was anybody paying attention last week? Have a willingness to listen. We must have that willingness to stop chattering in our heads and to listen. And we talked about the power in the simple act of going into the silence, quieting our minds and saying, okay, God, Spirit, Universe, Mother, Father, God, whatever we choose to call it, I'm listening. I'm listening. So now what? I'm listening. Now what? What do we do? I'm going to share with you two stories this morning that answer the now what question. And when I've told them, let's see if we can figure it out together, okay? So there was this young man, and he'd been to Wednesday night Bible study. And the pastor had shared about divine guidance and a willingness to listen to God. And the young man couldn't help but wonder, gosh, does God still speak to people? I mean, in today's day and age, does God really still speak to people? So after the service, he went out with some of the friends that were part of the Bible study, and they went for coffee and pie, and they discussed the message. And several different ones really talked about how God had led them in different ways. And so, the man's still pondering this, and it's about 10 o'clock, and he starts driving home. So he gets in his car, he sits down and he thinks, God, if you still speak to people, speak to me. I'm willing to listen. I will listen. So he begins driving, and he goes down the main street of his town, and he has the strangest thought to stop and buy a gallon of milk. He shakes his head and he says, God, how do I know it's you? And he didn't get a reply, and he started to go home. But again, that thought, buy a gallon of milk, pops into his head. And the young man thought about how Samuel and how he didn't recognize the voice of God. And he said, okay, God, in case that is you popping that thought in my head, I will buy the milk. What's the harm? I can always use a gallon of milk, right? So he stops and he purchases the gallon of milk, and he starts off towards home. And as he passes 7th Street, he felt that urge to turn down that street. And this is the crazy thing, he thought, as he's driving, and he drove on past the intersection of 7th Street. And again, he felt that he should turn down 7th Street. So at the next intersection, he does a U-turn. And he says half jokingly out loud, okay, God, I will. And he drives several blocks, and then suddenly he felt like he should stop. So he pulls over to the curb and he looks around. And he sees that he's in kind of a semi-commercial area of town. And it wasn't the best, but it wasn't the worst of the neighborhoods either. The businesses were closed and most of the houses looked dark, like the people were already in bed. And again he sensed something. Go and give the milk to the people in the house across the street. The young man looked at the house, and it was dark, and it looked like the people were either gone or they'd already gone to bed. And he started to open the car door, and then he sat back in his seat, and he said, Lord, this is insane. These people are asleep, and if I wake them up, they're going to be mad, and I'm going to look stupid. Again, he felt like he should go and give the milk. Finally, he opened the door. Okay, God, if this is you, I will go to the door, and I will give them the milk. If you want me to look like a crazy person, okay. I will be obedient. I guess that counts for something, but if they don't answer right away, I'm out of there. So he walks across the street, and he rang the bell. He could hear some noise inside. A man's voice yelled out, who is it? What do you want? And then the door opened before the young man could get away. And the man was standing there in his jeans and t-shirt, and he looked like he'd just gotten out of bed. He had a strange look on his face, and he didn't seem too happy to have some stranger there knocking on his door. What is it? He said. The young man thrust a gallon of milk. Here, I bought this for you. The man looked at the milk and rushed down the hallway, speaking loudly in Spanish. Then came a young woman carrying the milk toward the kitchen. The man was following her, holding a baby, and the baby was crying. The man had tears streaming down his face. The man began speaking, half crying, half speaking. He says, we were just praying. We had some big bills this month. We ran out of money. We didn't have any milk for our baby. I was praying and asking God to show me how to get some milk. His wife from the kitchen yelled out, I asked God to send an angel with some. Are you an angel? The young man reached into his wallet, and he pulled out all the money he had on him, and he put it in the man's hand. He turned away and he walked toward his car with tears that were streaming down his face. That's a really touching story, isn't it? It's very powerful, and it provides a pretty clear answer to the question, I'm listening, now what? Doesn't it? But just in case you aren't sure about the answer, here's another one. Two men were walking in a field when a bull charged them. One man scampered up a tree while the other stood defiantly in the bull's path. "Get up here, you idiot," called the man in the branches. "The Lord will protect me," retorted the other man. "No, get up here, you idiot." The other man screamed again just at the very moment that the bull butted the man on the ground, tossing him like a rag doll into the air, and trotted off triumphantly. The friend scampered down to help his bruised friend. "I thought sure the Lord would help me," complained the injured man. "He tried," answered his friend. "Didn't you hear him calling you from the tree?" So, what is the answer to the question, I'm listening, now what? Anybody? Follow that voice. Follow the voice, take action. That's the key right there. Take action. Last week I shared with you a passage from the Science of Mind textbook. The Spirit within us is God, and only to the degree that we listen to and seek to obey this Spirit shall we really succeed. I'm listening. Now what? Now follow. Now obey. Now do something. Take action. In her book, which I have right here, Building Your Field of Dreams, Mary Morrissey has a chapter entitled Guidance, Recognizing the Voice of Inspired Insight. And I have to tell you that this was required reading by every leader in our church up in Sacramento. This was when Reverend Avis was still there, because we were building our Field of Dreams then. And we should all read it here too, because that's what we're doing here. And in this chapter, she shares a letter that one of her congregants once wrote to her describing how listening and acting upon her inner voice guided her toward a fulfilling dream. And this person who wrote in said, "I was desperate. I'd lost my job. I was depressed. I was lonely. I didn't know what to do. I had heard about a singles potluck, and the voice inside me urged me to attend, but I didn't really feel good, and I hadn't gotten ready. Still, I kept getting this feeling and this nudging that I should go to the singles potluck. It got later and later until I realized that if I did actually go, I'd be an hour late. So that was it. I decided not to go. But that nudging, it said go. And so finally I thought, okay, if I'm to practice following this voice, I'd better go. If I'm late, I'm late." So she raced to the store for some chips and dip, and arriving at the potluck over an hour late, she found one of the few vacant seats at the dinner table. As it happened, the person sitting next to her just happened to be looking for an employee with her skills and background. She concluded her letter. The voice said to go, and all I had to do was do what I was told. All I had to do was do what I was told. I'm suggesting this morning that it's time that we listen. We take some time, and then we follow the instructions that we hear. It's time to listen and do what we're told, right? It's time to listen and to obey. And for those of you who have authority problems, because I do, I'm not crazy about that word obey. Don't get your dander up, because no one is telling us, they're not telling us that it's not a parental kind of thing. We're not being told what we have to do. We're always given a choice, right? It's not an authoritarian thing. Mary Morrissey writes, calmly, clearly, and without judgment, our inner voice is always ready to help us move toward our highest good any time we choose to listen. Remember, it's not telling us to do something that's going to take us away from our good. It's leading us to our highest good. As we increasingly listen to and follow our inner guidance, we find ourselves navigated to our dream. You will be told very specifically, listen and you will be led. Remember, God can do for us only what God can do through us. God can do for us only what God can do through us. Willingly follow your voice of God, even if you would rather sit home and fret. Who's wanted to sit home and fret before? I have. Sometimes it's hard to get up and go do it. There's an important concept here. Follow that voice to the edge of the light you see. The psalmist sings to God, "Your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path." When you carry a lantern at night, the path is illumined only a step or two at a time, right? I go out for walks sometimes at night, and I can only see a few steps in front of me with my flashlight. Go to the edge of the light that you see. Take a step, even a baby step, and only then the light can show you the next step, because it moves with you. Some of us want guidance, but we demand to know all of the details up front. Okay, I'll do that, but can you guarantee? Can you tell me how this is all going to work out? Okay, I'm going to play it all out in my mind the way I think it should happen. Boy, that's called outlining. And when we do our treatments, we don't outline, do we? We feel what it feels like to have the outcome that we'd like, and then we let God color in the details. We don't want a lantern. Most of us, we want a floodlight. Can you just show me the whole path, please, so I know where I'm going to end up? If we can't see the end of the path from where it begins, we become paralyzed. The man in our story at the beginning of my talk didn't know the entire plan up front. He didn't have an inner nudging that said to go buy milk, turn down 7th Street into a questionable neighborhood, go knock on the door of a dark house and give the occupants the milk. He didn't have all those instructions all at once. If he'd had, he may have headed home as fast as he could. Guidance works only one step at a time, and only when you're willing to take action. Remember when Rod and Sandy came down in August, and Rod sang for us, and Sandy was here? And, some of us have heard the story that Rod told us about some of Reverend Sandy's recent health challenges. It seemed that rather suddenly she couldn't speak. She was losing her ability to speak. Her words were coming out jumbled, and she was just having some real difficulty. And they went to the doctor who ran tests, because at first they thought, well, maybe it was a stroke, right? And no, everything was clear. That didn't show up at all. And they couldn't really explain why she was experiencing these symptoms. And so Rod was treating, and he was meditating, and he was listening, for clarity on what to do for his beloved wife, Sandy. And soon, after this, he was talking. Sometimes you're thinking, gee, I need an answer, and the phone rings, right? Well, there was a minister, a mutual friend from Florida, who said she had the very same symptoms that Reverend Sandy had had, and she had been diagnosed with water on the brain, or hydrocephalitis. Is that what it's called? I'm not a medical person, but what they did with this woman is they put a shunt in and drained the water out, and she said within hours of the procedure, her speech was back. So Rod was mulling this over, and he thought, well, that was very interesting, and thought, well, maybe he should call a neurologist on Monday. But now this was the next day, was Sunday, and he was traveling by himself up to Chico, where he was going to sing. And so he normally, as he said, on this 2-hour drive, would listen to talk radio. He would listen. No, he didn't listen to talk radio. He listened to classical music, because he's a musician. He loves to listen to classical music. But he decided to listen, just out of the blue, to this radio station. Something inside of him said, let's listen to this. And they just happened to be talking about hydroencephalitis. What are the chances, right? In other words, they, were the excessive fluid that, was happening on someone's brain, and what they did. And they were talking about methods to resolve the issue and what type of doctor to see. And so Rod at this point is realizing that he's being given a pretty specific directive. And he followed through on Monday. He found a neurosurgeon who would perform the surgery like that week as quickly as possible. And it was amazing, because Reverend Sandy's speech did begin to improve almost immediately. She still has some challenges. I'm not sure where it all is, but they've made significant progress. So that was a really good example of how, when you pay attention, when you're in the present moment, the messages do come through. So, okay. You're willing to listen, and you're ready to take action. But you still have that gnawing question. How do I know it's you, God? So here's a couple of ideas to help you answer that question. First, remember that Spirit's voice is always the voice of love. Always the voice of love. In the New Testament, we're told that God is love. Ernest Holmes said, the God of love cannot hear the prayers of one who does not love. That's pretty much as simple as it gets. The voice of God is within is never one of correction, punishment, discipline, or revenge. The voice of God never contaminates or condemns, and it always empowers. It's honest, and it's based on integrity. Does it harm no one and nothing intentionally? If I follow what I'm hearing, will it increase my level of enlightenment? Will it make me lighter, freer? Will I have more joy and peace and love? In spirits, if it's spirit speaking, when we expect that the fruits and attributes of spirit will be the results. So when we know that the results are the fruits and attributes of spirit, the love, the joy, the peace, the compassion, then we know that it's spirit speaking. Hakuna Matata. That's our little Disney moment for a moment there. So now we have a few ideas to help us be divinely guided through life. First thing, Hakuna Matata every day, because I think that's part of it right there. The first is to have a willingness to listen. A powerful prayer is, God, Spirit, Universe, I am listening. The second is to evaluate whether it's or not it's God by by asking a few questions. And the third is to be willing to take action. So treat and move your feet. That's what we do. We treat and we move our feet. Do something. Do what is in front of you. That's Mother Teresa. Gee, how can I help the whole world? How can I save the whole world by loving like you do, Mother Teresa? Do what is in front of you.
Did you hear the story about Mother Teresa before she passed away? She was supposed to give this speech to this huge convention, and as she went into the building, there was a homeless man dying on the sidewalk, and she stopped and held him in her arms, and she never did get inside. And when it was all over, they all came out and said, well, where were our lessons? Where were you? You weren't there to tell us anything. And she said, this is your teaching.
Right
this
here.
is your lesson.
Yeah, I
She
teach
stayed there
by
until
showing
the
you.
homeless man passed away.
Wow. That is amazing. Do what is in front of you, even if you don't have the full picture yet. I am the center. This is what Ernest Holmes writes. I am a center in divine mind, a point of God consciousness. God conscious life, truth, and action. My affairs are divinely guided and guarded into right action, into correct results. Everything I think, say, or do is stimulated by the truth. There is a power in this word that I speak because it is of truth, and it is the truth. There is perfect and continuous right action in my life and my affairs. Right action alone has power, and power is God, the living Spirit Almighty. This Spirit animates everything that I think, say, or do. Ideas come to me daily, and these ideas are divine ideas. They direct me and sustain me without effort. I love what Suzanne always says, with grace and ease. I am continuously directed. I am compelled to do the right thing at the right time, to say the right word at the right time, to follow the right course at all times. I know that this is the truth, and this truth has set me free. And so it is.